What do you get when you cross the top-down, tile-based worlds of Ultima and the first-person random battle scene in Wizardry? The birth of Japan's domestic role-playing game tradition, that's what. I'm Michael Corlem, and today I'll be providing an analytical playthrough of Yuji Horí's bombshell console RPG Dragon Quest, localized in the US as Dragon Warrior. New videos are posted on a regular basis, so if you're a fan of this level of depth that my videos provide, consider subscribing or becoming a channel member so you don't miss anything. 1986's Dragon Quest wasn't the first role-playing game produced in Japan, but it was the game that codified the form, becoming successful enough that the earlier computer experiments have relatively little impact on what the genre would look like in the following decades. Part of this is simply that it was nearly impossible to port computer games from Japan to the West. Japanese monitors had unique resolution requirements due to the complexity of kanji, so computer games would be designed for those monitors. Localization would be easier going from the Famicom to the Nintendo Entertainment System, as they were both designed for use with standard consumer televisions. Enix was founded as a game development contest intended to lure in programmers from Japan's hobbyist scene. The winner would get a cash prize as an advance on their royalties, and the company would publish their game. Was this exploitative? A little, but it wasn't an unusual business practice in the early 80s Japan, and it was a foot in the door for a game development industry that didn't really exist, even if they were not considered employees of Enix. One of the winners was Yuji Horii, who submitted a game called Love Match Tennis. Another early winner was Koichi Nakamura. The pair used their winnings to visit the US for Applefest, a microcomputer festival where they encountered the CRPG Wizardry. I haven't covered Wizardry on this channel because there's really not much to talk about in terms of narrative content, even compared to the first Ultima, but for the purposes of its influence on Dragon Quest, it's a first-person dungeon crawler with a separate combat screen that employs tactical menu-based combat. Nakamura became a huge fan of Wizardry, while Horii was a bigger fan of Ultima. They decided to collaborate on an RPG for the Nintendo Famicom that combined Wizardry's tactical combat and statistics with Ultima's tile-based exploration and NPC interaction, simplified for the console, which was marketed for a younger audience than the Western CRPGs were. Yuji Horii was a writer, and he'd written articles for the magazine Shonen Jump, through which he'd met Akira Toriyama, creator of Dragon Ball. Toriyama would end up doing the character and monster designs that would become emblematic of the series. Music was produced by Koichi Sugiyama. Already a well-known composer in Japan, he wrote some fan mail praising a shogi game that Enix had released, and they took the opportunity to recruit him to create music for their games. I'll be playing the US release for the Nintendo Entertainment System, renamed to Dragon Warrior to avoid trademark conflicts with the tabletop wargame Dragon Quest, released by SPI in the 1970s and acquired by TSR in the early 80s. The US releases in the series would continue to go by the name Dragon Warrior until Dragon Quest VIII. There are a large number of localization changes from the initial Famicom release and the MSX computer port, and I'll go over some of these as we play. Ultimately, though, I am evaluating the US localized Dragon Warrior. The game saw later ports on the Super Famicom, Game Boy Color, Nintendo Switch, and Android, all of which improve and rebalance the game, so if this video inspires you to give it a try, I would recommend looking into one of those options. Dragon Warrior's manual is typical of the little booklets that came with Nintendo games, featuring colored illustrations alongside the text. The story goes like this. In olden days of yore, the realm of Alefgard was cloaked in darkness. According to legend, a brave warrior, Erdrick, brought light back to the land by defeating an evil being. He used the balls of light bequeathed to him by a friend to drive off the enemies of Alefgard. He then gave the balls of light to King Lorik, who unified Alefgard. The land was at peace for many generations. In the time of King Lorik XVI, the balls of light were stolen from Tantagel Castle by the evil DragonLord, and once again the kingdom of Alefgard was plunged into darkness. Many travelers fell prey to the merciless fangs of monsters, and the beautiful countryside was transformed into poisonous marshes that hindered travelers. It was also rumored that several towns and villages were destroyed, wiped off the face of the land by ghosts and dragons. Many brave warriors tried to recover the balls of light, but none of them ever returned from Charlock, the DragonLord's dark castle. The people longed for peace but did not give up hope. The great seer Maheta predicted that one day a descendant of the valiant Erdrick would come forth to defeat the DragonLord. Okay, so we need to name our character, and this matters more than you might expect. The game looks at the first 4 letters of your name, C-O-O-R in this case, and uses those letter bits to tweak the formula for which your stats improve as you level up. Basically, 2 of your stats will be better than the others. The math is complex, and I'll link to a page that explains it in the video notes, but using Golem as a name will give me slightly better strength and hit points at higher levels. But ultimately it's not that big a deal, and it won't have a huge impact on gameplay. The interesting thing is that this is entirely black boxed, and you won't really notice it unless you play the game a whole bunch of times. And here we go! The game has begun, throwing us right into the castle throne room. The screen is made up of 16 by 16 pixel tiles and 16 by 16 character sprites, and a relatively small library of only 16 characters with a few dozen tile types to build the world out of. We can clearly see Ultima 3's map influence down to the brick floors, though the Nintendo Entertainment System is capable of greater color depth and we can see more detail and even shading to provide the illusion of depth on the bricks and treasure chests. Characters are bigger and more colorful as well. Toriyama has issued Ultima's human proportions for something easier to read and more expressive. Japanese audience had already been exposed to the super deformed or chibi animation style through his Dragon Ball manga, though earlier examples date back to at least the 1950s, and those visuals probably wouldn't have been as popular with the more serious-minded RPG players in Ultima's Western market at the time. Descendant of Erdrick, now listen to my words. It is told that in ages past, Erdrick fought demons with a ball of light. Then came the DragonLord, who stole the precious globe and hid it in darkness. Now, Golem, thou must help us recover the ball of light and restore peace to our land. The DragonLord must be defeated. Take now whatever you may find in these treasure chests to aid thee in thy quest. Then speak with the guards, for they have much knowledge that may aid thee. May the light shine upon thee, Golem. We get a big storytelling improvement right off the bat. Instead of dropping the player into the countryside and letting them wander, we start the game with an inciting incident of having the king task us with recovering the ball of light that our ancestor Erdrick used to banish demons, now stolen by the DragonLord. It's only after we're given this directive that we have control of our character. This is a console game, so controls are much simpler than in the CRPGs we've examined in this series. We can walk around with the D-pad, open up menus with a button. The menu gives us our list of commands, much abbreviated from what we contended with in Ultima, but not without its redundancies. Talk lets us talk to whatever NPC we're facing. Spell lets us cast spells from the magic submenu. Status lets us look at our character's traits. Item lets us use an item, stairs is used to go up and down stairs, door unlocks doors if we have a key for them, search searches the tile we're standing in, and take lets us take the contents of the chests. Like I said, there are redundancies. In later games in the series, take and search would be combined, and stairs would be used automatically if walked upon, and still later games would simplify opening doors, taking objects, and talking to a single button press outside the menu system. But back in the dawn of console RPGs, this is how the player would interact with the world. It was the input we had into our narrative, and it worked for what it was. We can see here, on the left, an abbreviated stat window headed by a shortened form of our character name. Our level, our current hit points, magic points, gold, and experience. This will pop up whenever we stand still for a few moments or bring up the menu, and vanish when we're moving around the game world. Our starting equipment is scattered around the chests found in this throne room. Gold we can use to purchase our initial weapons and armor, a torch, telling us that some areas will need light sources, and a key we'll have to immediately use on the first door that we see. That's right, we're locked into the throne room with the king and his guards. Or maybe they're locked in here with us. Outside the throne room we can see more tiles, and note that they didn't bother with a line of sight mechanic to hide features from us that wouldn't be visible from the character's vantage point. The guards here tell us that we can save by speaking to the king. Dragon Warrior incorporates a cartridge battery pack allowing for games to be saved. The Famicom original, Dragon Quest, required players to use a password system, though you'd still have to return to the king to use it. That's going to shape gameplay a bit. Dragon Quest is fairly linear compared to Ultima's open world layout, but we will constantly need to return here to save the game, leading to a lot of back and forth traversal. Leveling up, on the other hand, is automatic, which is far more convenient. There was a time when Brecconary was a paradise. Then the DragonLord's minions came. He's talking about the nearby town specifically, but that applies to the continent as a whole. Most of the NPCs here give us general gameplay tips, use the torch to light caves, or reinforce our quests by asking about the princess, but a few provide small nuggets of world building. The old man down here restores our MP. Doesn't matter much at level 1 because we don't have any, or any spells to cast for that matter. Let's take a quick look at our stats. Strength covers our damage, agility is our defense, mostly reducing the damage we take in combat, maximum hit points and magic points are self-explanatory, attack power is a factor of our strength and equipped weapon, and defense is agility, armor, and shield, none of which we start with, well except for the agility. So stats are pretty simple and rise in a largely linear fashion. Green guys you see on the screen are merchants. These guys aren't selling anything to us, but they drop the world building that many traveling merchants have been killed by the monsters that now roam the land. To become strong enough to face future trials, thou must first battle many foes. He's not kidding. This game is like 80 to 90% grinding to earn gold and go up in level. We can only access maybe half the castle at the start. We'll need to find someone selling keys before we can talk to the rest of the NPCs, and that's the other 20% of the game. Go to a new place, talk to everybody, and gather hints. Here we have the world map. Grassland and forest tiles work the same, mountains and coastline are barriers, hills slow us down slightly as we pass, and that stuff around the castle south of us is a poisonous swamp that does damage as we cross it. We're going to rush to the next town quick because random encounters are sudden and frequent. Unlike the Ultima series, we're not going to see wandering monsters on the world map. Instead, every couple steps, they're going to suddenly trigger on us. One thing the Dragon Warrior borrows from Ultima is the town greeter telling us the title of the community we're visiting. Another game tip telling us how shops work, same as in Ultima, talk across the counter. Warning us about poisonous marsh terrain. Hills also affect gameplay by slowing us slightly, but the forests and deserts are purely visual differences. The old man here tells us to come back if we're cursed. Another service if we happen to accidentally wear a cursed item. Art thou the descendant of Erdrick? Hast thou any proof? Well, the king believes so, and honestly that's the only characterization the protagonist gets in the game. No personality, just a point of background that our ancestor was the culture's great hero. Many have been the warriors who have perished on this quest. More backstory, we're not the first adventurer sent to recover the Ball of Light. Given our lack of weapons or experience, only our bloodline suggests us as inappropriate for the adventure, so maybe things are getting a little desperate. Tell King Lorik that the search for his daughter hath failed. So the king didn't send us out to save the princess, but he has some of his own soldiers out looking. Note that we don't have the ability to tell him what we've been asked, and this guard here hangs out for almost the whole game. This guy lets us know that the other castle we saw to the south was Charlock, Fortress of the DragonLord. Not a bad bit of foreshadowing through map design. We can see the end game, though it'll be a long time before we can actually get there. Tool shop, but let's spend our money on weapons first, 120 gold won't go far. Our weapon options are bamboo poles, clubs, and copper swords, more than we can afford, and our armor choice is limited to clothes, leather armor, and a small shield. We could afford a bamboo pole, clothes, and a small shield, but our primary concern in combat is how fast we can get through the fights, meaning we should focus on offense. Bamboo poles give us +2 damage, but clubs will give us +4. Most of the time we're going to strike first, and if this first strike kills the opponent, they won't have the chance to retaliate. If we can do that consistently, it's better at keeping us from taking damage than armor. So we're going to buy the club, leaving us with 60 gold, which we can spend on clothes for 20, but the extra +2 defense isn't really going to help. We can risk a few fights without it to save up for the better armor, skipping clothes entirely. Does this mean we're walking around naked? I leave that as an exercise for the viewer. Note now that equipping the club has given our sprite a weapon. Sadly, this doesn't vary based on what we've got. There are a few visual improvements over the Famicom release of the game. The sprites are improved, not only in design, but in the original they lacked sideways and up animations. You were always facing down. Not only did this look funny, but when you use a talk command, you'd also need to specify a direction. They also added coastal tiles to the world map, a small but noticeable improvement. After a few steps, we get into our first fight against our first foe, the iconic slime, one of Toriyama's most endearing designs for the game. Combat doesn't just put us into a tactical battle screen like Ultima, instead Dragon Quest draws from its other major inspiration, wizardry, to give us a menu-based battle screen. In the center we have our happy little slime, and on the left we have our stats summary window, and in the upper left our command window. Each round we can opt to fight, cast a spell, run, or use an item. We have no spells or items, so we fight, doing a random amount of damage and taking a point in return. We repeat, killing our enemy and getting 2 gold and 2 experience. This is often referred to as tactical, and in the game Wizardry it actually was. You had a full party of characters, and you had to choose which economy of action to take each round. Would you attack? Would you use some of your limited spells? Would you heal someone? Would you defend? And let the rest of the party take care of things. Not so here. It's always one-on-one fights, so all we really do for the most part is use the fight command. Occasionally, if an enemy is too strong for us or has some special abilities that warrant it, we'll use one of our spells, but for the most part, we're just going to fight and fight and fight and fight. In fact, our goal right now is to wander around the environment killing slimes until we can afford to buy armor, and we're able to one-shot enemies from time to time. Sometimes we run into red slimes, which have 1 more hit point and give us slightly more gold, but in general, even with our double XP and Gold Romhack, it's going to take a lot of grinding to get us to a point where we can think about fighting tougher monsters. In general, we're going to want to grind around a town until we can afford to buy all the best equipment it offers before moving on to the next town, and that is going to be the core loop of the game. Go somewhere new, fight things until you can buy everything, and then go somewhere else new. Fortunately, if all we want to do each round is attack, we can make this go slightly faster just by holding down the button, which selects the default fight command each round and skips the confirmation presses. Here we level up to 2, improving our attack power slightly and gaining 7 more max hit points. No spells yet, and leveling up didn't increase our current hit points, so we're still at 6. Might as well hit the inn. When we talk to the keeper, you'll note that the text is all red. This is because we're below a certain threshold of our max HP. It wasn't red before because our max was only 15, but at 22 it is. This is a warning that you're in trouble if you're so zoned out grinding that you hadn't noticed. Fully healed, we head back into the grind for a few fights until we hit 70 gold, enabling us to return to town to buy the leather armor. This gives us +4 to our defense, bringing it from 1 to 5, meaning less damage taken, meaning fewer trips to town to heal. We now want to earn enough gold for our shield. On the other hand, we might also visit the tool shop. Here they sell torches, healing herbs, and a dragon scale. That last item doesn't use up an equipment slot, but provides a passive +2 defense while it's in our inventory and only costs 20 gold. Half of the protection of a shield at a quarter of the price, so we might as well pick it up when we can. Back to the grind, stopping only briefly to visit the king to save the game. We hit level 3 before we get to 20 gold, our power goes up, our response speed increases, boosting our defense. We get 2 more hit points and 4 maximum magic points, just enough to cast our first spell, Heal. Heal will restore 10 to 15 hit points for 4 magic points, and it'll be our only restorative spell for most of the game. It doesn't scale very well and costs more than many of the higher spells we're going to learn, but here in the beginning it can save us on inn costs. The castle holds an NPC who can restore our MP, meaning we can just spam heal as much as we want. It's not a huge saving, but at this point every little bit helps. What is the role of magic in Dragon Warrior? It's hard to say. Even the old man who restores our MP doesn't really mention it, and nobody else is presented as a spellcaster. Given the lack of commercially produced items to restore magic, it might be safe to assume that we, the descendant of Erdrick, are the only one capable of casting spells, aside from the monsters, of course. That's not entirely true. Other NPCs we meet will use one-off magical effects on rare occasion, but nothing like the spells we ourselves cast. That's entirely speculation on my part. In the text of the game, new spells are automatically gained with higher experience as a part of our natural personal growth. The world does not otherwise touch on the subject of what magic is or how it works. it might as well not exist in the narrative and only as a gameplay convenience. We fight a red slime, get a few more gold, then hit the tool shop for the dragon scale. All that's left to grind for here is the small shield, 90 gold. That's 45 slimes killed, 45 fights, minus a few depending on how many red slimes spawn. It's going to take a while, a couple hours maybe. We make the mistake of straying a little further north than we perhaps should, finding ourselves fighting a ghost. Doesn't do much more damage than a slime, but it does have more than twice as many hit points, meaning many more rounds spent trying to kill it, and taking many more hits. Nothing we can't handle, but not a good trade in time and hits for golden XP, at least not until we're doing more damage. Worse, only a few steps away we fight our first Drakey, almost as strong as the ghost. If we were down more hit points, we'd have been in trouble. It's best to stick around the castle for a while longer. Grinding, you see, isn't so much about can I beat the monsters here, but can I beat the monsters here efficiently enough to not have to worry about it? Can I just walk back and forth holding down the attack button? It's going to take forever either way. It's painless if you can zone out while listening to some music, or a podcast, or whatever. Which I can't do because I'm recording this for a video, so I'm stuck here listening to the original music, which, don't get me wrong, it's not bad. This is iconic. I love this. I hear it in my dreams. But, after an hour or so, maybe I want to listen to something else. We hit level 4, increasing our response speed, hit points, and a huge increase in our magic points, and learn the Hurt spell. Hurt spell is okay, does around 10 damage, it's much more than our club is going to do, but it's not sustainable, doesn't scale well, and our MP is currently best saved for heals to limit how often we need to go back and fill it up. Eventually we hit level 5 and feel more comfortable grinding further north away from the castle, fighting the occasional ghost or Drakey. We also find our first cave in the middle of a small desert patch. No one has told us to come here, but we jump in to explore, and find ourselves in the middle of a black screen with the only tile we're standing on illuminated. In a departure from both Ultima and Wizardry's 3D wireframe dungeons, Dragon Quest dungeons are displayed as tile maps. Only we are restricted in how much of them is visible. A torch gives us a 3x3 field of vision, just enough to see the surrounding tiles, making the process more maze-like. This particular dungeon lacks random encounters, and in the second floor we find a tablet that reads, "I am Erdrick and thou art my descendant. 3 items were needed to reach the Isle of Dragons, which is south of Brecconary. I gathered these items, reached the island, and there defeated a creature of great evil. Now I have entrusted the 3 items to 3 worthy keepers. Their descendants will protect the items until thy quest leads thee to seek them out. When a new evil arises, find the 3 items, then fight." We now know we'll need to find some things along the way, even if we don't know what they are. This is really all there is to the main quest line. It is a much simpler quest than in Ultima or Wizardry, and that's not a criticism in any way. While the limitations of the Famicom and Nintendo Entertainment System play a role, a bigger factor is their target audience. Consider that, in the 80s, computer gamers essentially had to solve a programming puzzle just to get their peripherals to work together. There was no plug-and-play. There were few standards, and just connecting your sound card incorrectly could cause real physical damage to your machine. Ask me how I know. Without standards, it was left to the consumer to figure out the quirks of getting software to work with their machine. So, by necessity, computer gamers had to be at least a little tech-savvy, and computer role-playing games targeted an even smaller, nerdier niche that would have appreciated the mapping puzzles involved with Wizardry, or the keyword tracking and complexity of an Ultima. Given the cost of even lower-end computers, this usually meant a tech-savvy adult. Consoles, on the other hand, were a consumer electronic marketed to children, particularly in Japan, where it was less appropriate for an adult to play that kind of game. That's not to say that younger gamers weren't picky, they appreciated quality, but that a game in a basically new genre had to be somewhat more straightforward. And in Dragon Quest's case it worked. It became one of the country's most popular and beloved franchises. That's an overlooked truth about game plots, whether you're talking about video games, tabletop games, whatever. They don't have to be complicated to be good. You can tell an engaging and straightforward story. Anyway, back to the game. Since we're confident in our ability to fight stronger foes, we might as well visit the second town in the game, Garingham. We're not being sent here after any clues as in one of the Ultima games, it's just the next closest town, and the only one we can reach without fighting much stronger monsters. As I've said, the game is more linear, and we don't need a clue trail to tell us where to go next. It's just the only place to go. That's one of the biggest differences from Ultima, where monster strength is tied to our level or how many steps we've taken in the world map. In Dragon Quest, monsters naturally get stronger the further we are from the castle, often jumping in difficulty after we've crossed a bridge. Why is that? Well, it's a mechanical conceit to provide for a steady increase in difficulty, the same way that every further town also has more powerful weapons and armors for sale, and the game itself doesn't comment on the phenomena. We're left again to come up with our own rationale for what's going to become a console RPG trope. Maybe the DragonLord emanates an evil energy that enables stronger monster closer to his source of power, or the king emanates a protective field that keeps the stronger beasts further from his own castle. And in response, there's a market for stronger weapons in the community surrounded by stronger enemies. Likewise, given that we encounter a deadly fight every couple of steps, we are told about a world in which travel is deadly. As those merchants in the first castle told us, maybe nobody travels anymore, leaving isolated communities at points of light in the monster-haunted darkness. Or maybe only we, the prophesized hero, are even capable of travel. We'll have plenty of time to consider the implications the gameplay imposes upon the setting as we grind along for hours and days. So, Garingham, a smaller town, just a single road with a few shops and a big mysterious building locked by a magic door, established by a legendary wandering minstrel Garin. We get a clue that the princess might be hidden in a cave, and a weapon shop inventory that adds hand axes, chainmail, half-plate, and large shields to our prospective equipment list. We also get the clue that the princess was kidnapped and taken east, so that's the way we're going to end up going. But first, more grinding! There's a lot of equipment here worth buying. Fortunately, one of our new enemies here, the magician, gives us a good deal more gold than the other creatures we've fought, though they can cast the hurt spell, which works as advertised. We're almost killed here, which brings us back to the castle and takes half our gold, but we managed to pull through. We hit level 6 before earning enough gold to upgrade to the copper sword, our first go at replacing old equipment. When we buy a new item, it'll automatically replace whatever we were previously using in that equipment slot, with the merchant buying it at half cost. And unfortunately we can't use that to shorten our grinding, we need the full amount for that new weapon or armor. The copper sword jumps our offensive power from +4 to +10, a big bump that's the equivalent of going up a level. This will make grinding for chainmail much faster, which is going to be a similar leap up from our leather armor. We're not going to bother grinding for the half plate, that 1,000 gold would take forever here, or the silver shield. 800 to 1,000 gold would take us forever to grind near Garingham, so we're just going to try and hit level 7 before moving on. And how do we know when it's time to move on? Well, usually when the monsters are too easy to give too low an amount of gold to make grinding for the next bit of gear reasonable. And that happens a lot. For variety's sake, we're going to grind over to the east, past one bridge but not the second, as again, monster difficulty tends to spike with every bridge you traverse. Level 7 gives us a potent new spell for our arsenal, Sleep. It doesn't always work, and enemies can wake up after only a round or two, but it does enable us to fight far more powerful enemies safely. This lets us reach Cole, the next town east, safely, overcoming the skeletons and magidrakes in our path. The villagers of Cole give us some ideas about the world around us. To the south lies a dangerous island. To the east of the town of Hawkness, there's a place we can buy powerful weapons. The weapon store here offers a hand axe for 560, that'll be our next target, half plate, and full plate. They only have a small shield, worse than the large shield back in Garingham, so we'll make a trip back to buy that after the axe. This old man tells us that the fairies know how to put Golem to sleep. The first time we've heard about fairies or Golem. Next guy tells us that Golem is afraid of the music of the flute. This bath, which is just a water tile, apparently cures rheumatism. Hast thou seen Nestor? I think he may need help. We don't see Nestor until near the end of the game, and this isn't any kind of subquest. A door here, but it doesn't really block us off because we can just go around near the old man near the swamp tiles. For now though, we're going to start grinding the gold we need for that hand axe weapon upgrade. So, to recap what we saw in Cole. First of all, Golem. We're meeting that monster much later in the game. Fairies, we don't really find much more about, we don't meet any. Their existence is only alluded to as part in this one subquest. Where in the world they might exist, we don't know. It's going to take a while to grind to 560. The local monsters, magidrakes, scorpions, magicians, ghosts, easily defeated by spamming fight. If we run into skeletons, we can use our sleep spell. The inn here costs us 20 gold per sleep, but we're earning enough here that it isn't too bad a dent. Hours pass. By the time we hit 560 gold, we're also level 8. We might as well take this opportunity to check out the western half of town. There's a guy here, behind a locked door that we'll have to come back for later. Coincidentally, we're told the southern island, the one we were warned about, holds the town of Rimuldar, where we can buy keys. The old man behind the swamp, we heal ourselves first, but it really only does a point or two of damage per step, and there's no status ailments like poison in the first Dragon Quest. He tells us that our weapons aren't strong enough to defeat the DragonLord and to come back later. We're not going to. That's really all the guy does, judge our weapons, and when we have the best in the game, we'll know it. Just west of Cole, we find a small shrine. The old man here proposes a test to prove our bravery. He wants a silver harp, offering to trade it for the Staff of Rain. He gives us no further instruction, clues, or direction in this matter, or even why we would want a Staff of Rain. But we're going to come back later to do it, so there you go. More grinding ensues, and after we've hit level 9, we can afford the large shield back in Garingham, so we're going to schlep back west to buy it. Level 9 has also unlocked a new spell for us, Radiant, that provides better light for us in dark caves. Let's make use of this spell in the entirely optional mountain cave south of Garingham and southwest of Tantagel Castle. Along the way, we fight monsters like those around Cole, some weaker ones as well. As you can see, the Radiant spell radius is 2 blocks larger than the torch, though it will shrink over time, where a torch lasts until you leave the dungeon. There are a couple of treasures we're after down here, but the deeper levels are also an okay place to grind, with some monsters you don't find outside of dungeons like the Druid. The skeletons are still the only ones we need to worry about, but our sleep spell takes care of them. The Fighter's Ring is one of the items we're after here, its description being that it increases our attack power. Truthfully, it does not. It doesn't do anything. It's bugged and putting it on does absolutely nothing. The second item we're after is the Death Necklace, an item that's cursed to damage us if we put it on, but can be sold for a lot of gold if we don't. Sadly, we don't get it. It's one of the items that only sometimes spawns, and we get 120 gold instead. It's not nothing, but far less than the necklace sells for. We could just leave and come back because chests do spawn again if you return to the dungeon, but I'm not going to do it. It's really not worth the effort. So in essence, knowing the ring is bugged, there was no reason to come down here. But can we consider bad programming part of the narrative experience? Imagine wearing the ring as a player, not knowing what it does, wondering how it impacts combat, if not by raising your attack power stat. That is itself a form of emergent gameplay. Whatever theory the player comes up with on their own, maybe they think they're scoring more critical hits than they used to, or that weaker enemies run away more often. I don't remember what I thought playing the game as a kid, but the broken item becomes a small part of the experience in a way that the developers never intended. This is emergent gameplay. I sure wish they'd fix it, though. We leave and head back east, not to Cole, but south this time, through a cave tunnel to the southern continent we were warned about. We're powerful enough that creatures up to magicians sometimes run away from us. That's one of the features of the game. As you grow powerful, monsters react to it. Not always, and not without launching into the battle system, but it gives us a sense of progression that we're now formidable enough that we scare them off. We need to be careful down here, because there's a dragon in the darkness. Not a random encounter, but if we explore off this single long route south, we can stumble into a fight we're not capable of winning yet. So let's just go south for now. We circle around the mountains, using our sleep spell to win any fights we come across. At level 9, we're not under-leveled, but we are under-equipped, and make for the town of Rimuldar. There's a lot here that we can buy. We want the broadsword for 1500 and the magic armor for 7700. There's also full plate, but we can probably skip it and go right to the magic. Despite all the grinding that we've been doing, we don't have enough gold for any of it. But the monsters around here will reward us with a lot of gold if we kill them. Most of the NPCs just give tepid flavor dialogue, but an old man on the west side of town tells us that Erdrick created a rainbow on the west end of the island, and that he entered the darkness from a hidden entrance in the room of the DragonLord. Two big hints about the main quest ahead of us. The next guard we talk to adds that we'll find the Stones of Sunlight in Tantagel's castle, behind a locked door we don't have a key for. Good news though, Rimuldar is where they sell keys. More importantly though, Stones of Sunlight. The Shrine of Cole holds an old man offering to trade the Staff of Rain for a harp. What two things might we need to summon a rainbow? Our quest begins to take shape. We also learn of a magic temple to the south, where apparently the monsters are yet even more terrible. One interesting NPC is the warrior here who asks us if we're wearing a wedding ring, reacting to our equipped fighter's ring. It's a nice little immersive bit of NPC reacting to the player in an area where you don't see much of that. In fact, I'm pretty sure there's nothing else like it in the game. Now, if we walk the invisible edge of the map, like this, we find ourselves in a shop that sells magic keys for 53 gold each. We won't buy any now, we don't need them just yet, and spending a few hundred gold would just mean we have to grind longer for what we do need. Grinding the wolves, warlocks, and metal scorpions around Rimuldar brings us to level 10 long before we earn the 1500 gold we need for the broadsword, so we're going to head south to the more dangerous monsters like wolflords, wyverns, and wraiths. Our strategy with these enemies is the same. Cast Sleep, then wail on them. The south also holds Goldmen. Tough foes, but they give us twice as much gold as anyone else, drastically cutting down how much grinding we're going to have to do. Sleep doesn't always work on them, but as long as we have the MP, we can keep trying it. Heading into the temple here gives us the curious message that our task has failed and that we might not be the one that Erdrick predicted. We're warped out of the temple. Curious because we have not come against any tasks directing us here. We'll just have to come back with proof of who we are somehow. Another spell we receive at level 10 is Stop Spell. Cuts off the enemy's ability to cast spells, useful when cast on the warlocks we face. Of course, we could just cast Sleep for as much MP, so we're going to do that instead. After picking up the broadsword, we grind for another day or so to get the 7,700 gold for the magic armor, also bringing us to level 11. Magic armor is great, heals us a full hit point every 4 steps we take, and reduces the damage we get from hurt spells. This is the second best armor in the game, and the last set we need to actually buy. We have enough gold from trading in our half plate for some keys, so that's what we're going to pick up next. For whatever reason, the shopkeeper limits how many we can buy. It's like it's an ingredient in meth or something. We can only hold 6 keys at once. We do have to buy them one at a time. Shopkeepers don't understand quantity in Dragon Warrior. We'll go ahead and unlock the doors here in Rimuldar. This old man, Howard, tells us that we'll find a magic item 4 steps south of the Bath and Coal. If we bring another key, we find a chest holding wings, an item that can send us back to the castle that we can just buy in an item shop cheaper than the key. Now, we just met Howard, and in another town, someone asked us about Nestor. Few NPCs are named in Dragon Warrior, and most of those that are tied in with a quest. Howard and Nestor are not, so who are they? Well, it's localization. Names given for the English translation. Howard and Nestor are literally Powered and Nestor, characters from a comic that ran in the Nintendo Power magazine from the late 80s to the early 90s. Nestor had previously been the cartoon mascot of the Nintendo Fun Club that predated Nintendo Power, and Howard was the real-life Nintendo of America spokesperson who had been one of the leads in the Nintendo Entertainment System's US rollout in 1985. It's a nice Easter egg featuring what to American audiences would have been the face of the company. In addition, due to Dragon Quest's success in Japan, they produced way too many carts of Dragon Warrior for American audiences, given less interest in the genre in the US. So what did they do? Well, they turned Dragon Warrior into an incentive to subscribe. If you subscribed, you would get a copy of the game. That explains the Howard and Nestor tie-in a little better, in my opinion anyway. But it's hard to imagine that at one point, RPGs were so unpopular in the West, they had to give them away. Just think about that. Alright, time to backtrack. We head back through the tunnel and north to Coal. First things first, we're going to need to search 4 steps south of the Bath and find a fairy flute. Previously, we've been told that the Golem is afraid and that the fairies know how to put it to sleep. This flute, hidden in town, is almost the only sign we'll see of them in the game. We ignore the first door we see. Again, we can just walk around the wall without wasting a key and talk to the old man behind this door. He asks if we found the flute. We have, so he directs us to the town of Cantlin, the only inhabited town left in the game world that we have yet to visit. That is correct. Tantagel Castle, Brecconary, Garingham, Coal, Rimuldar, and Cantlin. 6 towns make up the civilized world of Dragon Quest, with some mention given of towns raised by the marauding monsters. Of these, only 1 trace remains, which we'll get to later. That's really all there is in Coal. We are going to continue backtracking west, fighting the monsters that aren't smart enough to run away from us. This is more aggravating than the grinding because they eat up our playtime and give us little in return. And random encounters are infuriatingly frequent. At least our magic armor heals what little damage they'll do to us along the way. Next up, Tantagel Castle. We can recover our MP, then hit the Royal Armory. The guard here cautions us against stealing, but this isn't Ultima. There are no penalties for it aside from the player's own conscience. Well, that and the fact that the treasures we find, 37 gold in all, are scarcely worth the cost of our key. The other door we find lets us access the eastern half of the castle. First NPC alerts us to the existence of the castle cellar. This woman makes the clue that we figured earlier, the sun and rain combining to form the Rainbow Bridge, more explicit. The merchant here sells magic keys, which you need a magic key to access, allowing us to resupply at least as long as we have at least 1 remaining. They're more expensive than they were in Rimuldar, but at this point the enemies are giving out enough gold that that's not a huge concern, and not worth the walk back to Rimuldar when we can just resupply here. The floor here does far more damage than a poison swamp. 20 per step. It'll take us 3 steps to reach this garden talk, learning that Garin's grave holds a wall of darkness that we have to push against. Finally, if we cleave to the east end of the castle, we find the entrance to the cellar. This kind of puzzle, the don't fall off the edge and return to the world map puzzle, comes from Ultima, which uses the same map trick in several of the titles. It's a good way to do something tricky with the base structure, but not one that translates directly into something in a narrative sense. It's very gamey, for lack of a better term. The old man here invites us to take the chest, and we do, finding the Stones of Sunlight, one of the quest items to summon the Rainbow Bridge. Interestingly, that they're plural. I envision them as little glowing rocks, warm to the touch, emitting light, but the game doesn't elaborate. It doesn't have the space on the ROM cartridge for that kind of thing. We now head to Brecconary, where a lone building has a locked door. The woman inside sells fairy water, which will simplify things to the point of eliminating random encounters that would lead us to fighting severely underlevel opponents. It's a huge convenience, to be honest, and buying fairy water uses the same rule as magic keys. We can purchase them one at a time, but unlike the keys, they don't stack. Each takes up a slot of inventory space. Did I mention that we have limited inventory space? Because we do, and only the keys stack. This makes the fairy water significantly less useful and best saved for the times we need to do a significant amount of backtracking. This is, I suppose, another reference to the fairies that don't otherwise show up anywhere in the game, making them somewhat like the Fae of folklore, ethereal, almost mythical beings in a world with magic and monsters. We swing by the castle to refill our keys, and hey look, the armory is back. Yes, that's right, locked doors reappear when we leave, but so do chests. The armory, however, contains less collective gold than a single key is worth, so we're not going to find an exploit here. On to Garingham, and we're going to sprinkle fairy water on ourselves to make the trip nice and easy. It only lasts for around 100 steps, but that should get us to where we're going. The massive locked door in Garingham has several NPCs wandering around, and only one of which says anything of real interest, referencing the lost town of Hawkness. Using the second key here is an even bigger waste, as both guards, standing alone in a locked room containing nothing, tell us only to talk to the other guard. The chests surrounding the merchant, which he doesn't mind you taking, contain a handful of gold, an herb, and a torch, all of which we currently have room for but don't really need. NPCs chatted up, the only thing remaining is the Wall of Darkness, the top of the screen. We bump into its length and find here the back of the building, which just leads to the grave of Garin, and an old man who warns us that the harp attracts enemies, just what we're looking for to trade for the Staff of Rain. But we're not really ready for that yet. First, we need to do yet more grinding to go from level 11 to 13, and this is going to take a while. There's a couple of good spots for this, but we need to go back to Rimuldar. With our improved gear, we can handle most of them without needing to cast spells, meaning we can go on longer and finish fights quicker without needing to go back to the inn. When we hit level 12, we get the outside spell, which we can use to quickly leave dungeons, saving yet more time if we grind in any, and helping us if we get lost. South of Rimuldar, we'll still want our sleep spell for the Wolf Lords and Wraiths. Hitting level 13 gives us another new spell, Return, which takes us back to the castle from the world map, the same thing the Wings item does, saving us some walking. We're stronger now too, maybe even strong enough to save the princess. Remember her? Rumored to be hidden in some cave? Well, she is. The cave containing northeast and southeast Alphagard, the one hiding a dragon. It's north of Rimuldar, so we'll head on over, and our Radiant spell shows us a locked door, the location of our missing princess. We find the dragon guarding her, put it to sleep, get ready for a long fight. and immediately one-shot it with a critical hit. Friends, this is not typical for a fight with the dragon, not even when leveled to level 13. We could probably have taken him on at level 11, but whatever, this is fine. Gwendolyn thanks you and asks you to take her back to the castle. It's a false choice. We are simply asked again if we refuse, so we pick her up and get ready to go. Now, a few notes. First of all, I mentioned this earlier, but saving her is optional. We don't have to do this. We could have avoided this fight and finished the game, leaving her down here in this dank pit. Secondly, we don't actually have to bring her home. As long as we don't visit the king, we can carry her with us for the rest of the game, down to the fight with the DragonLord. But since the king is the only way we can save, that would probably require we put off rescuing her until right before you go to finish things. And neither of these options is overlooked. Neither are bugs or design errors. The ending would be slightly different if you made one of those choices. It's a small branch in the game, but at a time when multiple endings are unknown, pretty significant. In this game, in this playthrough, we're going to bring her home. It's unfortunate that nobody remarks on how we're carrying the princess until we return to King Lorik himself, except for the guy who asked us to save her to begin with. The king thanks us, and Gwendolyn gives us an unspecified reward. If we talk to her, she basically browbeats us into saying that we love her with the same "but thou must" false choice dialogue. If we check our inventory, we see that Gwendolyn's love is an item. Using it, from almost anywhere in the game world, tells us how many XP we are short the next level, as well as our X and Y coordinates from the castle. This will be important later, but effectively, her love is a GPS. And like a GPS, it doesn't work so well indoors. Princess saved, level at 13, we head back to Garingham to get that harp. The chests are back again, so we can get another torch and herb, only this time we don't have room for the torch. We have the option to discard something, but honestly we don't really need it, so whatever. On to the grave, which is a 4-level dungeon. First level, we'll fight things like poltergeists and come to a door. Good thing we have keys, but we find stairs down to the 2nd level. There are multiple staircases in each level, but some will lead to dead ends. Mapping is helpful, at least if you indicate what kind of areas the different staircases take you to. It's a lot less complicated than the Ultima games were, and so much less complicated than the Wizardry games. The 3rd and 4th levels have harder monsters. Spectres now give us a reason to use Stop Spell because being put to sleep can be a major disaster. Some of the underground monsters, Droll Magi for example, look just ridiculous and it's difficult to take them seriously. The 4th floor has a staircase back up to the 3rd that brings us to a previously inaccessible area containing the chest with the harp. If we use the harp, it'll instantly summon a random encounter, but it only works outside. While that would be helpful for grinding, it isn't really too many steps between fights to begin with, and we're going to hang out here in the grave grinding anyway. It's not a bad spot. Fights are decent, and an outside spell brings us to the entrance in town if we run low on MP. From there, it's a short trip to the inn and back, and we can go back down to the 3rd and 4th level. While the doors will reset themselves if we leave town, as long as we don't, they stay unlocked, so this won't cost us any keys. As you may have been able to tell from this entire video, grinding to level up is the major part of Dragon Warrior, and what that translates to, in terms of the game's narrative, is training. Dragon Warrior is the story of a relatively unskilled warrior wandering the wilderness and training until he's strong enough to face the evil DragonLord. Okay, our goal in Garin's grave is to go from level 13 to 15, earning at least 23,000 gold along the way. That will be enough for the last items we need to buy, the Flame Sword and the Silver Shield, and to get these, we need to go to Cantlin, the furthest city set in one of the most dangerous areas of the world map. First, though, we're going to go back east to the shrine near Cole to trade the harp. Our newest spell, Repel, acts as fairy water, eliminating fights that aren't worth our time to face, and making the long walk fairly uneventful. Now we have the Staff of Rain, along with the Stones of Sunlight, one of the items we need for our Rainbow Bridge. But we're nowhere near ready to face the DragonLord yet, so let's buy what we need from Cantlin. We cast the Return spell for a short to get to the castle, restore our MP, and then head southwest to the last part of the continent area we haven't been to yet. We face some new foes along the way: knights, Magiwyverns, demon knights, and wizards. We can hold our own, but it's a constant drain on our MP, so not very sustainable. Fortunately, we're not here to grind, we're just here to make the run to the town where we can gear up. Then the Golem attacks. It's one of the strongest enemies in the game, but it has a fatal weakness. The Fairy Flute puts it to sleep. Even with this edge, it almost takes us out in one hit, and we need to use the flute again to keep it down long enough to kill. The victory gives us access to Cantlin, the last town. We're here for our final shopping trip, so we hit the equipment shop next to the entrance. But what's this? Cheap gear from the first two towns. Not to worry, Cantlin actually has 3 equipment shops with different inventories. But first let's hit the inn and heal up and get rid of the red danger taint. This guard gives us the hint that the last person to hold Erdrick's armor was named Wynn. Behind the door here, we find a key merchant, selling for a price of 98 gold, and a merchant selling the flame sword and silver shield we need. We're able to buy both, and now all we need are Erdrick's sword and armor, which we'll have to find, not buy. From here on in, gold is largely useless beyond paying for inn fees and new keys, both of which are pretty cheap. Fairy water, don't need it thanks to the repel spell. Another wind clue: he had buried something of great value at the foot of a tree behind his shop. And we finally find Nestor, who doesn't say anything interesting or important. This central structure could be entered from the sides, though water in the middle makes it better to enter from the other corners. The old man inside tells us that we can find out about proving our connection to Erdrick in this very town. Using a key brings us to this counter, but we can't talk to the guy unless he's directly on the other side, and it doesn't look like he'll be there for a while. There are a lot of damaging tiles here, so we'll need to cast heal a few times to make it through. The Old Man we reach tells us to search 70 leagues south of Tantingale Castle and 40 east. These are easy coordinates to find with our Princess Love GPS, and not impossible without it, but you can see how rescuing Gwalin makes it much easier. We finally managed to get this guy near his counter, and he tells us that his grandfather Wynn had a shop on the east side of Hawkness. That's it. The third clue to the location of Erdrick's armor. Wynn had it last, Wynn buried something of great value near a tree behind his shop, and Wynn had a shop on the east side of Hawkness. 3 clues that, collectively, give us our subquest. To be perfectly honest, I would have found that more satisfying if the 3 clues hadn't all been found in the same city right before we get the armor. If we had to work a little harder. But it makes more logical sense this way, as Cantlin is the only town near the ruined city of Hawkness. The people who knew Wynn would most likely have been here. Our business in Cantlin concluded, it's a short walk back to Hawkness in the middle of the desert we passed through. The thing about Hawkness is that it's a ruined town. Instead of shops and NPCs, we fight monsters. The enemies here are tough for us, even with the weapons we have now. Werewolves and star wyverns, and we've a bit of a boss fight ahead, so it's best to save our strength. We find Wynn's shop on the east side, with a tree behind it, and there we fight the Axe Knight. It's a tough fight. He can cast Sleep, so Stop Spell is our first move, but he hits hard even without it. Herbs are a better healing option than the Heal spell, so we stocked up ahead of time. Victory doesn't give us the armor. We have to search for it, and if we're unlucky or unfortunate enough to move off the tile before searching, guess what? You gotta fight him again. But we grab it, we wear it, and our defense goes up, and more importantly, we now heal 1 hit point every step we take, massively improving our survivability. Not so much that we're going to level up here. Not yet. Instead, we're going to go south. The enemies are a little tougher than those around Hawkness, but not as bad as those around Cantlin. But more importantly, you can find metal slimes here. Metal slimes are tough, not because they do a lot of damage, but because it takes a few rounds to beat them, and they have an annoying habit of running away right before you do. That said, if you do take them out, they give out the best XP in the game. And that's a good thing, but we're going to need to level up from level 16 to 19 before it's worth our while to grind in Hawkness. That's 6,000 XP, or almost half of what we've earned throughout the entire game so far. We are going to need to spend a few days grinding here. At 17, we get a new spell, Heal More, that heals us for a whopping 100 HP for 10 MP. That's nearly a full recharge and will be the core of our strategy at the end of the game. After that, well, it's more grinding. The only thing we're going to be doing for the rest of this game is grinding, all the way to level 20, at which point we'll be able to reliably take down the DragonLord. The only big change is where we're going to be doing that grinding, where the most efficient training spot is, in narrative terms. Around level 19, we can grind in and around Cantlin with its Star Wyverns, Wizards, and Green Dragons. That's right, the first sub-boss we faced, guarding the princess, is now just a normal enemy. Along the way, we're going to seek out Erdrick's token, the proof mentioned at 70 south and 40 east of the castle, here in the middle of the Poison Swamp. What are we going to do with this proof? Shove it in the face of everybody who asked for it so far? Well, no. It's just the catalyst we need to combine the Staff of Rain and the Stones of Sunlight to create the Rainbow Bridge. And when we hit level 20, that's exactly what we're going to do. Does this make much sense from a narrative perspective? No. But it's how the game works. This bridge connects the last bit we need to reach Castle Charlock, and the end game. The DragonLord's castle is a maze, and that starts on the ground level. Stairs hidden by damage fields protected by the same strong monsters we've been fighting. On the ground floor, we have multiple entrances to the dungeon, all of them decoys. If you remember back, an old man told us a legend of Erdrick entering the darkness behind the DragonLord's throne, so we search back there and find the real stairs. From here on out, each dungeon level has multiple staircases leading to exclusively accessible stations of each level. Each is filled with monsters, nothing we can't handle. No big deal, right? Well, here the game comes down to resource management. We are going to survive the boss fight by casting Heal More as often as we need to, and that's going to be pretty often. That means we're saving our MP, which means fighting as few battles as we need to, and Charlock is a maze, which means a lot of exploration to figure out the best path to take. Trying to fight everything would waste away our MP, so we're just going to run from everything as often as it lets us. There's more down here than the DragonLord, however. One path we can take leads us to Erdrick's sword. We probably need this to finish the game without grinding a few more levels, but sadly it lacks the special attacks to match the healing power of the armor. It's just a more damaging weapon, kinda boring, but there you have it. One of the insidious traps down here, an interesting twist on the dungeon formula we've seen so far, is an endless corridor. Heading down, it repeats endlessly, so in effect, a greater waste of time in fights that we don't need. Fortunately, it's easy enough to escape. Just go back up the stairs. Eventually, we make it down to the 8th floor, an open layer without darkness where we can face the DragonLord himself. There's a treasure room down here, but it doesn't hold anything we really need.
Welcome, Golem. I am the DragonLord, King of Kings. I have been waiting long for one such as thee. I give thee now a chance to share this world and to rule half of it if thou wilt now stand beside me. What sayest thou? Will the great warrior stand with me?
Hell yeah.
Really?
Yeah, bro, sign me up.
Then half of this world is thine, half of the darkness, and if thou dies, I can bring thee back for another attempt, without loss of thy deeds to date. Thy journey is over. Take now a long, long rest.
So yeah, if you agree to join the dark side, the game just ends frozen on the dialogue screen, and you'll need to reset. So don't do that. I do like how they ask you really, and it's like not a fake choice, as with the Princess's Love. This makes the DragonLord a bit less toxic of a relationship, I suppose. So that's actually a canonical ending, and a major branch in the narrative. The timeline in which you said yes leads to the Dragon Quest Builders series of games. But we're going to say no in this playthrough, which leads to him calling us a fool, and now it's time to fight. So it turns out the DragonLord isn't really that hard. We're able to take him down with only a few hits, revealing his true self, a fake-out, and a tough fight. Basically, we want to cast Heal More anytime our hits drop below 50. We don't want him to take us out in one hit, and attack any time that we're not forced to cast that spell. And hope we don't get unlucky because we're limited in how many MP we have, and nothing we have allows us to restore them. Honestly, it feels like we're healing more often than attacking, and that makes the final fight of the game far more harrowing than anything that came before it. Fortunately, level 20 allows us to pull through. Pull off the Ball of Light, eliminating all the monsters. Across the land spreads the brilliance until all shadows are banished and peace is restored. The game's not over yet, though. We have to manually return to the castle. It'd be easy to cast Return, but this is our victory march through an Alfagard free of monsters and random encounters. Unfortunately, we don't get any Ocolods from the NPCs we pass, who simply tell us King Lorik is waiting. He tells us that we are truly the line of Erdrick, and thus it is our right to rule this land. Will we take his place? We respond with the first lines we get that aren't a yes-no menu, declining in favor of finding a new land to rule. Gwalin begs to be allowed to go along with us, and, yet again, our choice is not a choice, and thus the tale comes to an end, unless the dragons return again. We get the end screen. Congratulations, thou hast restored peace unto the world, but there are many roads yet to travel. May the light shine upon thee. Honestly, that screen feels unnecessary. All of that was covered by the cutscenes. Roll credits. So, grinding aside, for what story there was, here's my analysis. Compared to the computer RPGs that came before, we saw a good use of the ROM cartridge's limited storage space for characters and dialogue. True, most characters lacked much in the way of names. There was King Lorik, Princess Gwalin, Howard, and Nestor. But in contrast to Ultima 3, each NPC at least had unique dialogue, save for the few who ask us for proof that we're the descendant of Erdrick. Maybe it's not up to Ultima 4 standards, but Yuji Horii inspiration was 3. Even if there were only a few types of NPCs in town, we can certainly appreciate the variety in what they had to say, at least if you only spoke to them once. The hero, in contrast, does not get any personality whatsoever. They're a blank slate avatar who isn't given any development aside from mostly fake choices and no lines until the very end. This is a design choice that will be the norm in Japanese-released console role-playing games for some time. As far as the world goes, it's obviously smaller. We've got 6 towns, set up with a fairly linear progression, meaning you don't really need to search for any of them. You just need to fight enough battles to get through to reach them. The towns are laid out well, but they don't feel like places that are actually lived in. There aren't any houses, but that's probably another limitation of squeezing in everything into a single NES cart. The world map terrain is varied and colorful, however. It's vibrant and exciting, and the monster battle sprites have character to spare. What we have in Dragon Quest is a narrative inspired by the top Western RPG series, but constrained by the needs and limitations of the Famicom system and the memory of its cartridges. If it's simple, that's because it was breaking new ground in the industry and console market. And if there's far more grinding to content, that's a combination of trying to give players value of the money they spent in terms of playtime, and not having the experience to hide that well enough. As with many of the 40-year-old games we've been covering, the point isn't disappointment, but appreciation for what they were able to do with what they had to work with. Dragon Quest is the first in a long heritage of console RPGs, and I'm not just talking about this one franchise. Next time, we're going to be covering Final Fantasy. Subscribe if you don't want to miss it. I'll be live streaming some of the grinding, so turn on notifications if you want to catch me while I'm doing that, because it's not scheduled and just when I happen to be doing it. If you want to support the channel, you can do so by becoming a member. Big thanks to my sandwich tier supporters More Liberty 1 and Drakflaz.